It's token drop time, and so we have a special guest today, Theo Forbath, and he and Sajat used to work together for many years, and I just recently was introduced to him through Sajat. Theo is founder of an organization called Above the Model, and before that, he was at Accenture as an MD. He was at Cognizant as a global VP. He's very knowledgeable in AI. And when I got introduced to him, I read Theo your Substack,
Yeah,
and I think that's the focus of, or maybe the way to kick off our discussion today.
sure.
All opinions that people voice are theirs and not necessarily of the companies they work for. And like I said, we don't talk about any, typically try to not to talk about any specific companies or products on this podcast. So with that said, I read this Substack of yours, Inside the Architecture, How Operating AI Actually Works. It was really interesting to me. But there was a line in there that I didn't quite understand. And maybe I could, since I'm talking to you, ask you directly, right? So you said if you watched a proof of concept video, proof of concept wow executives, and then quietly stall 6 months later, you've already seen this. And then you say the models are usually not the problem, the missing architecture is. So I didn't quite understand what you meant by that. And maybe that's a way to begin. So over to you.
Yeah, what working with my clients, what I have started to see is they can successfully launch an AI pilot. There's no issue there. And in fact, more and more of my clients are starting to take some of those smaller AI pilots or self-contained ones and putting them in production at scale. Where things are falling down for them is there's an invisible layer that there's no investment code for, what I've been calling the connective tissue. Um, and when companies haven't started to think through how to build a shared context for agents that are being orchestrated and how to manage working memory and long-term memory, tool contracts, evaluation frameworks, and continuous observability. If you don't begin to put that in place from the beginning, going back and retrofitting agents and your infrastructure to be able to do that gets very expensive. So, what I've been really emphasizing for my clients is if you can't demonstrate that each agent you're building is cheaper than the last one, then I'm not sure you've got your AI operating model or operating system right. And so I feel like that capability to be able to really demonstrate that is where the rubber hits the road right now for many of my clients.
So the missing link is the missing architecture is that operating system, that AI operating
The
system.
connective tissue, which is
Connective,
one
yeah.
of the three layers.
Yeah.
There's the what I would call the orchestration layer, the supervisory brain, if you will, which holds state across multi-step tasks, decides which specialist acts next, manages the handoffs, knows what to do when something goes wrong. So it's not an automated chain. And I
Right.
think that that's really what orchestration layer sets apart. It routes dynamically based on not only what it's seen, but what it learns over time. So
Indeed.
that's that first layer. And then the next layer is these expert agents or these specialists, role defined, domain specialized, stateful, tool calling actors, if you will, virtual actors. And they produce structured outputs with citations. So a real expert agent in my mind is the model plus the architecture around it that both constrains it, so manages the hallucinations, which we both know are real and aren't going to go away, and equips it. And then the connective tissue, which is this piece that nobody talks about and everybody underbuilds, which is really where you're able to take a hallucination that happens on a single event and keep it from cascading down, which is what I'm seeing for a lot of my clients when they don't build in this connective tissue.
Hmm.
So I,
Go ahead.
I was gonna talk about one client, an insurer, and a problem they ran into was insurance claim adjudication. And so they began to put agents in place, agentic agents in place with an orchestration layer. And so the insurance claim would need to be adjudicated. And the next step for each agent really depended on what the evidence shows, what the policy language says, what the loss facts are, what the prior claims are, what the fraud signals are. Those are all independent agents, expert agents. And if they hit an unexpected combination and it falls through to a default, which is a structured way of giving up, without that real orchestration reasoning about the combination with the fixed intent adjudication of the claim and routes accordingly, you can see these hallucinations begin to cascade down and affect each insurance adjudication. So that's why this orchestration layer and this connective tissue layer, the invisible layer, is so important. And what I'm seeing is it's just treated as plumbing. It's assumed in 2026, it's deferred, and it's being built ad hoc.
Indeed, Theo, I think, I couldn't relate more with this. I can add to what you said from two different perspectives. One perspective is a business perspective. You might have brilliant individuals who, if they are not bound together by common objectives and a common operating model, it's hard to form a company that tries to meet its goals.
Great analogy. Yeah.
So you got to have defined roles, defined responsibilities, accountability, and exception handling mechanisms, escalation paths, resolution mechanisms. And for each of these functions, I think there are rule books, guidebooks, playbooks, run books that describe who does what and what to do in case, something fails.
Right.
And a different perspective is that of an operating system. So I've been an operating system engineer for about 10, 12 years. I think Sam knows that. Sam also worked in the same company. And even as an operating system layer, you can actually literally relate these down to operating systems concepts. This is a scheduler that dynamically schedules work to on available CPUs so that you're continuously making forward progress. Then there are specialized functions like I/O processors, like graphical functions, and when you need special, capabilities, then those tasks are routed to those specialized processing elements. And then you're continuously trying to optimize for resource usage, for throughput through the system. There are failure reporting mechanisms, failure recovery mechanisms. You don't fail abruptly. As much as possible, you try to fail gracefully. And then you perform handoffs and notify and alert somebody responsible in the event you can't make forward progress. So these are the mechanisms. So really what we're talking about, whether it's at an operating system level or whether it's an organization level, you're talking about an operating system or an operating environment for for a bunch of collaborative agents to work together. And that could not be more relevant than it is today. And as you rightly said, you can always build an individual agent, you can build an individual function, but how do you demonstrate productivity in the organization? It's only by getting these agents to work together to automate these workflows and demonstrate forward progress.
It seems like what you're talking about, Theo, is even more important in an agentic workflow where agents are talking to agents. Because if you're looking at a human, and somebody, I mentioned this story before, somebody I know says, hey, he's building a startup guy, he's building some software, and his customers, when they run a question, if they don't like the answer or they're not sure, they'll run the question again. And so maybe they have the judgment to determine what's the right answer or wrong answer. But how would an agent know that? Agent's going to take whatever answer it gets back and say that's the gospel and go to the next step. So it seems like that's really even more important, that agentic workflow where agents talking to agents, no human in the loop, is even more demanding of what you've been talking about.
Theo referred to something called evaluation frameworks, right? So are you evaluating the execution of these tasks at each step, and making sure that that task was completed to satisfaction, it met all requirements for a successful exit? And if not, then what are the actions, right? Do you need to restart it? And restarting has its own challenges, right? If I were trying to withdraw money from your bank account and deliver that into Sam's bank account, and if I failed after withdrawing money from your account but not having delivered into Sam's account, you need that atomicity. You need transactional consistency across these operations.
That's right. The observability and traceability across all the components.
Yes.
Rather than a per component.
Correct. Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that really requires, and that increasingly frameworks like LangGraph are trying to build two-phase commit protocols, which allows you to make sure that if you're performing two or multiple such operations, you get all or nothing kind semantics, right? So if I withdraw money from your account, Sunil, and deposit that into Sam's account, and if I failed halfway through, either you want the entire transaction to have completed or none of those actions to have been executed, right? So you want those kinds of semantics. So it's hard. So you need, and now think of these systems in distributed agents, right? You have agents from one company transacting with the agents of another company. You're an e-commerce buyer and you're transacting with a supplier, and they are running in two different environments, two different stacks, and you still want these agents to somehow collaborate, cooperate, and make forward progress. It's much, much harder. So an appreciation for what this involves, and to build these kinds of systems. And also, a lot of people, as Theo said, may not see immediate business value, right? What is the business value in building some infrastructure when that infrastructure, you don't see any monetization of that infrastructure alone, right? You see monetization when you build actionable agents, but the supporting infrastructure is also needed, like building roads and bridges. It's an investment, but building those roads and bridges helps allow commerce to flourish. So it's almost.
Yeah. And I have 5 questions that I often use in an early meeting with clients, kind of trying to understand if they really have that orchestration layer or a chain in disguise. So I'll ask, can you replace it with a switch statement or a sequential pipeline without losing functionality? And if they say you can, then you do not have orchestration. You have a workflow with agent vocabulary. And then are your agents stateful actors or just wrapped LLM calls? Because real expert agents make LLM calls too, but they also maintain memory within a task, call tools through defined contracts, and produce structured outputs with citations. So the question is whether anything else is going on beyond the model call. And the third question I ask them is about this connective tissue and whether it exists. Can they point to a shared context layer, an evaluation framework, an observability infrastructure, as we've been talking about? or are they kind of on a roadmap after launch? And then very importantly, and one thing you called out, Sajad, is can you trace a complete decision back to each of its inputs? Like any output the system produced last week, can you reconstruct what context, which tool calls, and what reasoning produced it? Because if you can't do that, you do not have the auditability that we need, and which I think is table stakes.
So that brings an interesting question. Since you're asking these questions of customers, Theo, what have you discovered? What are people doing?
People are all different places in their journey around um, building this connective tissue and being able to kind of look at what I call 5 of the maturity areas that companies need to focus on first, with this idea of a shared context, a single authoritative schema governed, versioned representation of a task state that every agent and the orchestrator reads and writes with concurrency, safety, and role scoped access.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is the memory, working in long term memory. Working memory that clears on task completion, and long term memory of patterns in prior cases that persist with governed write back. What gets promoted, why, and with what providence. So mature memory adds relevant scored retrieval, expiry and forgetting policies, and poisoning defenses, so a bad write does not corrupt future reasoning. And there's specific tools out there for that, but we're not going to get into them here. And then the other areas are around tool contracts, an evaluation framework, so you can continuously automate testing at both the single agent level and the end-to-end orchestrated level, and that observability component, the request level tracing across all components rather than at a per component level. And so you need to be able to say, for any decision in an AI system, you can reconstruct it. Which agent, what context, which tool calls, what confidence, what payloads, and at what cost.
It's interesting you spoke about memory. We had one of our earlier colleagues, Theo Werner, on our podcast, Werner Gertz.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember Werner. He's
yeah,
great.
he is great. Yeah, so he was alluding to the notion of an enterprise-wide knowledge fabric. As these agents are discovering and learning, and as they're writing to memory, and from that memory, are you extracting best practices? Are you extracting your company's knowledge and curating that and building a flywheel out of it? So that's an interesting concept now, since you're always in front of customers and speaking to some of the most, advanced, users of AI. What have you seen in this regard?
Many of my clients are really understanding and internalizing the importance of getting the data right. And they're most of them right now are looking at a data mesh strategy using maybe a data fabric from one of the vendors, but really having a central governance body for data architecture, for taxonomy, for metadata, and then uh, using a federated model and a fairly decentralized approach to allow each of the businesses to curate and own the single source of truths, whether you're in the product group and so you're managing a PLM system, or whether you're in finance and so you're responsible for the finance data or in warehouse or supply chain or sales or marketing, each of them are going to adhere to a common set of data governance and data policies that then allow the business, which is really what AI begins to uncover, is the politics that exist in so many clients. I don't know if you've seen this yourself, but
Yes.
so much of that data lives in silos. And so the real value of AI is when you can cut across those silos and begin to look at the data and get those cross-cut views. So research understands what's happening in sales, and marketing can see uh, what product management is doing to prepare the next generation of products based on what's selling. And so there's real value there that AI is unlocking for the first time. And that unlock really comes down to the quality of the data.
So if you,
Indeed.
one of the things I really think in this space is we talked about it earlier with Sajad and me on the on a separate call also on the write back heuristics, uh, on the memory drift that happens. What about contamination versus privacy, right? And
Right.
also on the maturity gap, right? The maturity gap is a bigger thing because um, vector databases give you similarity search, not memory, right? Real memory needs consolidation, contradiction, resolution, and forgetting, right?
That's right.
And so
That's why I talk about working memory and long-term memory as two distinct types of memory.
Correct.
so
Yes.
And
you
that model drift problem, where I land on that is you need to be able to baseline anything you're going to ask a agent, a model, an AI system to do. You got to baseline it in multiple dimensions, but a very important one is going to be able to put those guardrails on
exactly.
each piece of output.
Correct. Exactly. There is, yeah, it's a foregone conclusion that there will be a drift in the nature of the data that's being fed to those models.
That's right.
And to be able to detect meaningful enough shifts in that data patterns and learning when to retrain the model or get a different model and or to even build some kind of guardrails around it, it takes a bit of effort. So again, that comes under the observability umbrella. Not too many people realize this. I mean, a lot of people think of observability as observe the flows, observe the mechanics of inferencing, observe tokens used, but also more subtle is the data drift that happens, model drift when you update newer versions of the model. And to be able to detect those drifts and to be able to act on those changes is also critical. And yes, so that's really quite relevant. And this is really these are your learnings from the field and talking to customers. So thank you for sharing that with us, Theo. So
That's my pleasure. Yeah. Go
another
ahead.
another thing is just memory, organizing memory, institutional memory. I mean, I think AI offers us an opportunity to actually capture that knowledge, which as individuals, as human beings, we, as best as we try to document and share with the institution the learnings and try and build that institutional knowledge, we still fail in many different ways because of our human failings. But these systems that you build, if you program them to store those learnings, that knowledge, and a disciplined way of harvesting that knowledge, curating that knowledge, and using that as a flywheel, as a business differentiator, that's super, super critical. So
And
even
that's
though,
why I use that test of is the next agent you're going to build cost you less to build and put in production than the last one.
yeah, yeah,
Because that really demonstrates that you're harvesting that information as you call it.
correct, correct, yes. And and I mean, for those of us who worked in the data industry for decades, people have still been trying to deal with data quality issues. And pointed out another problem, data hugging, right? If I own data, you know, should I be sharing my data with everyone? And should I be sharing it with only some people? But really, the value is how do you fuse that data and extract those insights out of it? Now we're talking, when you're talking with models and knowledge and governance, it's about really distilling the data into core nuggets of knowledge and integrating that knowledge. And that's far more powerful and much harder to do. And that's really, I think, a lot of people are beginning to realize. Google just open sourced open knowledge format, the way to represent knowledge and model knowledge. So we see industry trends and recognizing now we're moving from raw data to distilled knowledge. And how do you help customers build those flywheels that generate that knowledge, not just by extracting it from raw data sources? And agents and the transactions will actually help build that, because when knowledge plus action, when knowledge is combined with action, that's when you get those experiences. And those experiences can then feed into those knowledge bases. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the thing we have to continue to monitor for is the model that invents a plausible sounding reason and saying, that's a user experience problem. But what my clients are worried is it's going to be a legal one.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we're starting to see regulation laws across, I think, different geographies. Now, you cannot blame the model alone. You still are the owner of that business or of that function, and you're liable far more than the model is liable. So you carry that liability, which means the investments, the focus on making sure that these models are well behaved, that you're serving correct, timely, accurate information to the consumers. And especially when you have multi-agent systems, one agent feeding information to another agent with little or no human oversight, it becomes significantly more critical to guarantee correctness and accuracy.
Yeah, I had a client again who didn't invest in this invisible connective tissue layer, actually had two agents contradicting themselves in answering a client's question. So,
I've seen those YouTube videos where someone is asking three different agents to uh, take turns to count from 1 to 100. And the amount of coordination, communication that goes on within these agents, they talk
right.
so much more than making forward progress. It's a hilarious video that I saw on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Theo,
we both know, you hallucinate the wrong part number or wrong compliance spec for a nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
That has some very significant results. So
Yeah.
we got to make sure we're
So there's a
putting the
lighter
right
vein question
guardrails.
I have for you, Theo. See, your architecture escalates to a human exactly when the AI is least confident, right? I mean, you write about it,
Right.
right? The hardest, weirdest cases. But those routine calls, the system now handles, or how junior specialists learn the domain, actually. They try troubleshooting, they try doing stuff. In 10 years, when your diagnostic agent escalates its toughest case, who's left on the other end, actually, if they never had that the training actually? Doesn't that build a vacuum there actually? Isn't operating AI quietly consuming the expertise pipeline that your human in the loops safety story depends on? And the problem with that is, think about it. We did the same with manufacturing. We gave it to China, and now we want it to be brought back to the US, and we have a very hard time in doing that. Do you think something similar will happen in the AI space when the junior specialists are really replaced with these agents actually?
Well, I think the junior specialists are going to look very different. I think there's going to be a new category of employee. I think of them as the builder, someone who is trained in school, maybe in pharmacy, pharmaceutical life sciences, but also is very comfortable writing Python code and understands how to spell more than just how to spell AI. You know, they're comfortable working with machine learning algorithms, and so those are going to be the next generation. I think of folks coming out of college who are going to be the most valuable are these builders, and so I think that's where we're going to see these junior people morph into, who are the ones who are really going to drive the adoption of AI at scale over time.
But why is it that they would need to know Python then, Theo? Because from what we've seen, the conventional thinking is, hey, with these AI coding tools, you don't need to know any language. You just tell it what to do and you just run the code. So why do you say they would need to know, Python?
You know, I think it is like when we talked about the early days of coding, and um, did you have to understand how the memory worked in the CPU? And yes, at some point it got abstracted far enough that no one even thinks about that. But I think right now we're still in the early days with AI. And I think we are in the early innings with AI. I think we're, in the first innings. And so when you talk about a 10-year time frame, I think what has to get us there is this deeper understanding of what goes on under the hood and not treating AI like a black box.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we're going to get in trouble in 10 years if we get too comfortable treating it like a black box.
And do your customers express these concerns to you, Theo? I mean,
They
are they
do.
talking
And
to
what is interesting is it's causing a shift in how they're approaching their AI programs. And they're getting less and less comfortable asking partners to do it. They're getting uh, seeing it as more and more critical to train their own people to get comfortable in being AI first thinkers.
Yeah.
So not just applying AI to a current end-to-end process, but reimagining that process being driven by AI. And they don't
Exactly.
think they can trust their partners to do that.
I think exactly. I think that knowledge creation frontier is going to be super critical because the AI can recall from memory every different pattern that it has seen.
That's right.
AI still haven't reached the ability of creating net new knowledge. So, which is where humans can still double down and focus on creating net new knowledge, whichever the field is, whether it's biology, art, architecture, across the domains.
Okay, I
Yeah.
think we're almost out of time. So is there anything else you wanted to, either Sam or Theo, anything else you want to say?
I think Theo is wonderful, actually. He answered all our questions so nicely, actually. One last question for you. This is kind of like been harping in my mind for quite some time about your orchestrator piece, actually, right? I mean, now the question that I have with respect to the orchestrator is that's a two-way street, right? I mean, fundamentally, from the standpoint that you ultimately, when you say that when the orchestrator cannot come to a conclusion, it leaves it to the human in the loop. I think that's a very important point. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, actually? Because that is the part which is very difficult to design from my perspective, especially in orchestrated layer, which, when does it give up? Right.
Right. No, how does it know when something is going wrong?
Right.
And that comes back to a comment I made earlier about putting in guardrails and going into any type of large scale, multi step task where you're using agentic technology is doing the baselining in advance. And so, you get the early signals and you are continuously have that observability layer going on in the connective tissue of when there is drift in the output that you're seeing from an agent or a model.
I think
So
that's going to be
it's not a reactive, it's a preemptive approach to managing the end-to-end process that you're asking to be AI first and human second.
I'm afraid that's the last word we're going to have on this subject. We've run out of time. Thank you so much, Theo. I will put a link to your Substack in the
Great.
description, and people can read your articles for themselves. It's very interesting. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it. Good to meet you, Sam, and
Thank you.
If you
take
could
care.
hang on, Theo, for a second,
Yeah,
we'll talk
sure
afterwards.
will.
Thank you.